welcome to this fourth podcast. In this podcast, I will address the conclusion of an academic paper. As with the introductions, I will not go into exactly how to write them, but I will still encourage you to think about the conclusions and highlight some of what I find crucial issues and guidelines to make them. And as always, a small disclaimer, this is only my view on things. Others, especially other academics from other fields, might have other views, other things to say about writing conclusions. So see this as one perspective and be of course critical. What do you think is the right for your paper? Now you have written maybe the core of your paper. You know your structure, how to present your data and argue your case in an interesting and convincing manner. Everything is finished and ready to be shipped off, except that you still need to conclude your paper. So finishing off a paper is often quite difficult actually. You might have used all your energy doing the other parts of the paper and think or seem to have run out of steam. But I really want to encourage you not to underestimate the importance of the conclusion. And this goes not only for academic papers, but also for other stuff that you might write in your professional life. This is exactly where you tie up everything in a short and concise presentation of the paper and its outcomes and results. It is often where the reader goes to gain a sense of the results. And so generally the introduction and the conclusion is where you as the writer will try to influence the reader. This is where you create interest, but also signal to the reader the worth of what is about to come or what has been laid out in the paper. So the choice of word that you use is important. For instance, in the conclusion you might want to emphasize the worth and importance of what you have presented in the paper. You can do that by use particular wordings or terms such as the findings in the paper are central to, or it could sound something like there is sufficient evidence for, or there is compelling reason to believe, or it is critical to, and so on and so on. This signals to the reader the worth of the content of the paper. However, just as it is important neither in the introduction nor the conclusion to underestimate the worth of the paper, it is of course equally important not to overestimate the worth. It has to be credible and grounded in what you actually show in the paper. So writing a good conclusion is also about critically think about the content of your paper and reflect upon that content's analytical reach. Okay, turning to the actual content of what is normally expected in a conclusion. The conclusion in an academic paper is normally the shortest section, but it is still needed to pack a lot of intellectual punch. So, according to Pat Thompson, the scholar who has written extensively on academic writing, the conclusion should hold some various things. The conclusion must remind the reader why the article was written in the first place. At the beginning, the writer will have argued that there is a niche or space in what is known, the existing knowledge, a puzzle that needs to be solved, a debate that needs continuing, or an issue that deserves discussion. The writer will then, in the paper, have promised to fill the space, solve the puzzle, contribute to the debate, or participate in the discussion. The conclusion must reprise the argument that has been made without repeating it. No one wants to read an article and then read it all over again in the conclusion. The conclusion must be a déjà vu-free zone. The conclusion must deal with the so what and the now what questions. Those were some of the things that we talked about in the first podcast. We've read the piece of research. So what? Who cares? The writer must not leave the answers to these questions to chance, assuming that any sensible reader will be able to work them out themselves. The conclusion must succinctly tell the reader how and why it is that what's been presented is significant to practice, policy, or further research. They must explicitly say how it is that the article constitutes a contribution to knowledge. They must also address the implications for further research or actions. So, in a sense, conclusions often speaks directly to the introduction. From this, we might construct the conclusion from 3 overall moves. So first, return to the research questions. Then, reprise and summarize, show clearly how you have provided an answer for the research questions, retelling your line of argumentation in the paper. And then finally, relevance. Visit how this is relevant, so this covers the so what as well as what is pointing towards. So the now what question. Often it is easier to tell what not to do instead what to do. So here are some common guidelines for the conclusion. Don't introduce new data, theory, literature, analysis in the conclusion. Do not place the synthesis of results in the conclusion. This goes into discussion or results section. Do not place the discussion of findings in the conclusions. Do not repeat what has just been said, for example about the findings in the analysis chapter. Be careful not to overestimate the findings and results. Think about the reach of your findings. And finally, avoid tailing off or make too grand statements or state the obvious or fall into writing typical cliches. Okay, let's finish off this with 2 exercises. First, try to read and analyze other conclusions to identify how they are constructed. Often you find that academics like to mix up things and create hybrids between reflections, discussions, and conclusions. Generally, this is okay, it can save space, but often it is far easier to keep things separated. And then second, from the above mentioned points, try to devise the first draft of your own conclusion. Try keeping it as short and concise as possible, not beyond 500 words, preferably less. This concludes this podcast. Thank you for listening.